Welcome to the Triple S podcast where we discuss the standings, the scoreboards, and the statistics. We're just coming off one of the craziest days of college football ever, all of which we're going to be talking about today, including the Tennessee-Georgia game, the Alabama-LSU game, the Clemson and Notre Dame game. But first we start with the number 1 versus the number 2 matchup, a game of the century as people call it sometimes, Tennessee versus Georgia. It was a really highly anticipated game. However, it really did not live up to expectations. The immovable force met the unstoppable object in this game, and the immovable force won in Georgia's defense. Hendon Hooker, Tennessee's quarterback, only passed for 185 yards and a touchdown, along with one pick. He was forced to run it a lot, and a lot of this is because of the pressure he faced from the Georgia front seven. He was sacked 7 times, and that Tennessee O-line has only allowed 11 sacks this whole season. And I think at certain points the pressure got too much for Hendon Hooker and this Tennessee offense. They looked lethargic on a lot of drives, and by the time halftime rolled around and started to rain, there was just no chance of them getting back into this game. And on the other hand, Georgia just dominated. Their offense was great. Brock Bowers, of course, he showed up again. Stetson Bennett played great, and that defense shows why they're the best defense in all of college football. Despite all the players they lost last year, they've just been able to replace them, and they just showed why they are the best team in college football, why they are the favorites to win the national championship again. And this was a real statement game for them against the number 1 team in the country that had a lot of hype going into this. Georgia shows why they are the true number 1. Tennessee just couldn't get started in this game. I mean, they were just, as I said, they would just look lethargic, and playing there in Stanford Stadium, it was raining, it was hard for them to move the ball, and that defense just showed up, even despite some injuries on that D-line. And speaking of teams that just didn't show up, number 4 Clemson got embarrassed by Notre Dame. 2 big interceptions helped Notre Dame, including a 96-yard pick six, but the train was off the tracks for Clemson from start to finish. All of the concerns that DJ Uiagalelei brought when he showed up to Clemson, how he played last year, were shown today. Ugly throws and inability to move the ball down the field, just not connecting with his receivers. And I think we have to start wondering, is it time to bring in the freshman Cade Klubnik? Because DJ, he's been able to manage this season, but there's been some close calls against North Carolina State, against Florida State, against Wake Forest, and he has shown up in those games, but today he just didn't show up against the Notre Dame team that just, frankly, isn't as talented as Clemson. Clemson was expected to win this game. Notre Dame is sort of on its heels this season. They lost to Stanford, they lost to Marshall, so this should have been the game that they won, but they just couldn't get it going. On the other hand, Notre Dame, they didn't do anything flashy, you know. Their only quarterback, only threw for 85 yards, but it was enough. They had over 100 games on the, they had over 100 yards on the ground. They managed the clock. They won the clock possession battle. And now we move on to Alabama LSU. LSU getting a huge upset against number 6 Alabama in their annual rivalry game. Alabama's woes this season continue to show as they lost in overtime on a spectacular play on that 2-point conversion to win the game. Very gutsy call by Brian Kelly there. And it shows how much trust he has in this LSU offense, which has really showed up this year. You know, Jaden Daniels played great once again, and he's a true dual-threat quarterback. Maybe even uses his legs more than through the air. He does a very good job with that. And then the rest of that offense has really shown up for a team that wasn't expected to win a lot of games. You know, it's a first-year head coach that they've been able to utilize the transfer portal really well. And on the other hand, Alabama, once again, very undisciplined. They gave up 8 penalties, 92 yards in penalties alone. and they looked discombobulated at many different points in this game, while LSU looked calm, focused. They continued to score even when they faced some difficulties. They were able to get down the field a lot of the time. And I think that this game, actually, it shows talent for the losing team out here, Alabama. Because they were able to keep it close even in a game where they didn't look like the better team. They just have that pure talent. Bryce Young didn't play great, but he's held back by a lot of his team. The O-line struggled. His receivers didn't play well at all. But he was able to will them towards overtime. And I think that this shows how talented Alabama is, but how many flaws they have this season. If it's with the penalties, if it's with the receivers, if it's with that defense, and it finally catches up to them here, and that's why they bump a couple spots in my top 10 list. The 8 people came out a couple hours ago, but this is my top 10 list. Obviously, number 1 is Georgia. They just look like the best team here. And they handled Tennessee here. We already talked about them. They're at number 1. Number 2 is Michigan, a team that I'm higher on than a lot of other people. Michigan hasn't played the greatest of competition, but they've been winning by a lot. They look really well, and I think that they will be prepared once they play Ohio State, because they played really well against Michigan State, and there's no reason for me to think that they wouldn't play well. That's why I have them at number 2, ahead of Ohio State. And number 3, I have TCU, because TCU it's been close games, but they've been playing real competition. Oklahoma State, Kansas State, Texas Tech, Texas. They're going to play Texas this week. They've been playing really good competition out there in the Big 12, and it's hard to stay undefeated in that conference. So for that reason, I'm going to give them the number 3 spot. Number 4 is Ohio State. It's a similar case as Michigan, except Ohio State has shown a little bit more games that they've struggled. For example, this most recent game against Northwestern led at the half, and Ohio State seems sluggish. They haven't been as bad as Alabama this year, but you see a lot of the same issues. Just not a lot of discipline, some key position spots just not being there. But however, they're talented enough that I think they're going to keep winning, but they're going to face a real reality check once they make it to that back end of the season. Number 5, I have USC. USC only had a 1-point loss to Utah, they're a really good team. And besides that, USC has been blowing their competition out of the water. I'm really excited about Caleb Williams. He looks really good out there. And at number 6, I have the former number 1 team, Tennessee. Tennessee, they just didn't show up against Georgia, but besides that, they've been playing really well. I already talked about the Georgia game, but I think that looking forward to next week, they can get it back on schedule here, because they'll need to, but they've been playing well, and I don't think there's any reason to show that they can't get it back on track here. Number 7, I have Oregon, who blew Colorado out of the water this week, and they've been playing really well. They just had that one terrible game against Georgia, but you see Georgia, they're number 1, they're great. So I don't think it's too much of a mark against them. However, it was a really ugly game, but I like seeing how Bo Nix has come back here. He's a leader in touchdowns in all of FBS, and he looks really good. Number 8, I have UCLA. Their only loss is to Oregon, so I don't think that they should be, out of the top 10 here, because they've lost to another top 10 worthy team. Number 9 is LSU. Their 2 losses have been pretty ugly so far, so I don't know about them being this high. But they did beat Ole Miss, and they did beat Alabama. So, you got to give them props for that, because those are 2 really good teams. And number 10, I do have Ole Miss, because their only loss has been to LSU, who just beat Alabama. And besides that, Ole Miss has looked really good. And notice that I don't have Alabama on this list because they've had 2 losses, and some of their wins have been ugly. They only won against Texas because Quinn Ewers got injured, and then Hudson Card didn't look really well because he was also a little bit hurt during that game. And they almost lost. They came one play away from losing to a now 3-6 Texas A&M squad. Who's looked really bad. They just lost to Florida yesterday, and they looked really bad. So I think Alabama's definitely a top 20 team, but I don't think they're a top 15 or a top 10 team here. And looking forward to next week, there's Ole Miss versus Alabama. That's going to be a huge game. There's also there's TCU versus Texas, a huge game out there in the Big 12. We'll see how TCU does. I think they're a really good team. And we'll cover all that next week, but that's it for me here at the Triple S Podcast. Thank you all for listening.